Thanks for tuning in to this presentation of The Path Forward. This is Daniel Workman. I am joined by Chris Kessel of West Virginia Soccer Association. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great this evening. Thanks for having me.
So we are going to talk through and look at the path forward for U.S. soccer. So as we kind of keep going, one of the next sections we want to look at is how the rest of the world operates. So if we look at how the rest of the world operates clubs, a typical club is going to have a first team, a reserve team, and then they're going to have youth teams below that. And, some will stop or drop at certain levels, or some will have teams at other levels that other clubs don't have. But generally, they are going to have a first team, some type of reserve team, and then some type of academy or youth team setup. What that does is it means that around the world, these clubs are operating in a player economy. So they are able to develop and identify players for their first team, but they are also able to develop and identify players that are sold to other clubs. And when these players are sold, those funds are then reinvested back into the club. It helps them continue to grow, or in some cases stay alive and operate. Clubs are also able to earn solidarity payments as well as training compensation. And so to just give a little bit of some information on those last 2 points, because they are often confused as to what they are exactly. The first aspect of solidarity payments is that if a transfer occurs between different jurisdictions, meaning if a player is sold from a team in the U.S. to the Bundesliga, like we've seen recently, when that happens and that player is in contract, then the fee is then negotiable, and 5% of that fee is distributed to all of the clubs involved in that player's training since the season of their 12th birthday. So that money adds up. It was estimated recently that the recent transfer of Pulisic from Dortmund to Chelsea would be worth over $700,000, I believe, was the number based on that transfer fee, and then that money should be, according to FIFA's rule on solidarity payments, would be divvied out to the clubs that helped develop him from the time of his 12th birthday up. So the next definition is training compensation. So to give a little bit of clarity on that, training compensation is paid to all clubs who have trained the player from age 12 to 21 when a player's status changes from amateur to non-amateur. So basically what that would do is have a major impact domestically. So if you were you identified a player in West Virginia, Chris, and you develop him at your club, and then that player signs a contract, let's say at 19 or 20, 21, 22, whatever the age is, then what would happen is your club should get a portion of that training compensation fee based on the years that they were with your club, that you were developing them. And
right.
So training compensation is typically much, much smaller than a solidarity payment.
And it's in countries, it's different in countries all over the world, but in the larger country, the larger soccer economy countries, there are different levels. So like if you are a very small club, you get a payment schedule that's much smaller than if you are in the Manchester United Academy. Manchester United is obviously investing much more money into developing players, so their training compensation payment schedule is much higher. England has multiple levels. I'm pretty sure that other countries do it a similar way to that. So, it's based on kind of the average amount of money that teams at each of these club sizes basically spend on their academy, so that it is, if they lose a player that signs the first professional contract with somebody else, they are still compensated for the time, energy, and effort that they put into developing this player. And it is just done so that people don't close their academies, because they know that if they develop a good player as a youth, they would go to one of the big clubs.
Absolutely. And, one of the key elements to understand about both solidarity payments and training compensation is they are not these policies that FIFA has put forth, these principles that are in play. These will not eradicate pay to play in America anytime soon, if ever, completely. But what it can do is begin to, over time, have an organic, natural effect on some of the really, really expensive aspects of pay to play. When you go beyond, a few $100s, and now you're looking at thousands of dollars, if these clubs were able to receive compensation for their work, then they would not necessarily be having to charge as much money to do some of the things that they are doing, and the market would also adjust based on the fact that these payments would be available. So you would have parents, you would have coaches, you would have players that would come to a better understanding, and then they would, along with other factors, begin to change and shape the player economy in the U.S. And that would have, over time, an impact on the level, the expensiveness of pay to play when we look at U.S. youth soccer. And, one of the things about American clubs is, just like we mentioned a few moments ago, a lot of U.S. soccer is segmented, and our clubs are segmented. In the U.S., in the absence of fully functioning clubs, we really have these one-eyed monsters. And what I mean by that is most U.S. adult teams, amateur and pro, often referred to as clubs, were created without youth academies. So these organizations are like trees existing without root systems. If you look at probably the two biggest stories in amateur soccer in the last 10 years, Detroit City FC and Chattanooga FC, both of these clubs were formed without academies, and they've had to kind of work backwards to address the youth setup in their areas, and are continuing to work on those. And so even our best success on the adult side started without having any youth system beneath them. So they were always having to bring in players from the outside. They were always having to try to create connections with their community, and all of that work has been fantastic. But they were not founded based on a community club from a generational standpoint. And on the flip side, you have most youth clubs in America were formed without having first teams. And the reason why first teams are so important is they create a defined mission, a goal, and an example for the academy players as well as their coaches. And I would even go further. It gives an example to the parents to understand what their kids are actually striving for. So these organizations are like houses without roofs. And, they're focused on developing players and building up players. And then there's a giant hole in the ceiling, and these players just go somewhere. There's no path for them after a certain age. It just stops. And, they either get back involved coaching in the club, or, they maybe years and years later bring their own kids back to be youth players in the club. But there is not a sense of a pathway for most youth clubs in America to take a 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kid and walk them through a multi-year, 8, 10, 12-year process, a pathway to a first team. And, what we need is to learn from those who are doing this well. And that's, happening around the world, especially in Europe. And, we need to change our mentality, both on the adult side as well as on the youth side. And we need to shift to having cradle to grave clubs. I like to call them generational clubs. And, and those clubs need to be in a system that incentivizes merit for the first teams and their associated academies. American soccer should be a land of opportunity for everybody who has a dream, who's willing to work really hard, who's willing to hustle, think outside the box, and compete and win. We need to fully embrace promotion and relegation, the principle of sporting merit as defined by FIFA, and we also need to implement solidarity payments and training compensation as well that incentivizes and places a priority on development. And, one of the things that we need to do is to start looking outside of our borders. It's real easy to get caught up looking at what we currently do, and we never really take a moment to look and study what is happening around the world and how are they actually doing what they are doing. Why is the Premier League so big? And why do more Americans watch the Premier League or Liga MX in Mexico than they do our own domestic professional league and Major League Soccer? Why is La Liga so popular? Why is Barcelona and Madrid the two biggest clubs in the world in terms of popularity? Those answers is where we will find where we need to go as a country